Good morning. We stand on the precipice of a new understanding of our universe.
October 6th, 2025. The world is not calm. For 3 days, a quiet, professional panic has been rippling through the highest levels of government and science. The shockwave from 3 Atlas has finally hit. The initial data from the Mars flyby is in, transmitted across 200 million kilometers of vacuum, and it has confirmed the worst whispers, the most frantic theories. The anonymous fortune post, once dismissed by mainstream outlets as elaborate fiction, is now being treated as the most terrifying intelligence leak in human history. The images from the HiRISE camera are classified, but the descriptions have bled out. They do not show a lumpy, cratered rock beneath the ethereal green comet of nickel tetracarbonyl. They show a surface. An impossibly old, impossibly smooth surface, marked with geometric patterns that defy any natural explanation. Spectrometers on the Mars Express and ExoMars orbiters did not just confirm the industrial chemistry, they found it to be of a purity that terrestrial labs would struggle to replicate. The recoil problem is no longer a debate. It is a fact. 150 kilograms of gas per second, venting with no measurable change to the object's trajectory. The laws of physics have not been broken, they have been shown to be incomplete. Or worse, they are being manipulated by a technology that renders them irrelevant. Avi Loeb's rating of 6 out of 10 on his alien technology scale now seems conservative, almost quaint. The global conversation has fractured. Publicly, space agencies issue calming statements about a uniquely fascinating but natural comet. Privately, they are drafting contingency plans for a reality they have no name for. The position is no longer tenable. The cognitive dissonance has become a global psychosis, and in the middle of this chaos, while every major telescope that could be spared was pointed at the receding form of Atlas, a world away in the high, dry air of the Chilean Andes, a machine noticed something else. The Vera C. Rubin Observatory is not like other telescopes. It is a sentinel, a wide-eyed surveyor of the night. Its purpose is not to stare, but to scan. Every 3 nights, it photographs the entire visible southern sky, generating a torrent of data so vast that no human team could ever hope to analyze it in real time. The task falls to algorithms, complex artificial intelligences trained to spot the single moving dot, the faint flicker, the one anomalous pixel among billions. At 217 Universal Time, an A-designated Helios 4 flagged an object. It was not flagged for its brightness. It was exceptionally faint. It was not flagged for its speed, though its trajectory was clearly interstellar, a hyperbolic path slicing through our system from a point somewhere below the ecliptic plane. It was flagged for a single, impossible reason. It was blinking. The object was designated foraginous. At first, the alerts were dismissed. An instrument artifact. A calibration error in the sensor array. A satellite tumbling in an unusual way. But the blinking persisted, night after night. It was not a twinkle caused by atmospheric distortion. It was not the steady fluctuation of a rotating body. It was a pulse. Clean, structured, deliberate. A long pulse of horizontally polarized light, followed by 2 short pulses of vertically polarized light. A pause. Repeat. A lighthouse in the interstellar dark. The call went out. At the Keck Observatory in Hawaii, at the Very Large Telescope Array back in Chile, astronomers reluctantly turned their instruments away from the primary crisis of 3 Atlas to verify the anomaly. They expected to find nothing, to debunk the report and return to the real problem. They did not. The signal was real. It was sharp, coherent, and utterly artificial. For 72 hours, the existence of foraginous was the most closely guarded secret on the planet. The world was already staring into one abyss. No one was ready to be told there was another, opening up right behind it. 3 Atlas had screamed its defiance of physics through brute force and impossible chemistry. This new object was quieter. It didn't roar. It whispered a message, written in the language of light itself. And the race to understand that message had just begun. The world was arguing about the nature of the weapon that had just entered the room. They never stopped to consider that someone was about to hand them the firing key. The discovery of foraginous was not a new chapter. It was a lens, a key that, once inserted, reconfigured the entire history of interstellar encounters. Suddenly, the strange events of the past decade were no longer isolated curiosities. They were a prologue. A pattern began to emerge from the noise, as elegant as it was terrifying. At a secure data analysis center in Socorro, New Mexico, a hastily assembled task force codenamed Echo Maker began the work. Their job was not to look forward at JANUS, but backward. To re-examine every byte of data, every observation, every paper written about the 3 visitors that had preceded it. They were looking for a context that they had been blind to before. One Imama, the silent scout. They started there, in 2017. The first confirmed interstellar object. It had baffled them then, and it haunted them now. Umyama was a ghost. It gave them nothing. No comma, no tail, no dust. Just a bizarre, tumbling light curve that suggested a shape unlike anything ever seen, impossibly thin, a pancake or a shard tumbling through the void. And then there was the push. That tiny, inexplicable acceleration away from the sun, a non-gravitational force with no visible cause. At the time, they had struggled for natural explanations. A nitrogen iceberg flaking away invisibly. A hydrogen solid. The solar sail of unknown origin. Now, viewed through the lens of JANUS, a simpler, colder possibility emerged. Umyama wasn't a natural object behaving strangely. It was an artificial object behaving perfectly. Its mission was not to communicate, but to observe. To slice through the ecliptic plane, test our detection capabilities, our reaction times, our analytical skills. It was a silent, high-speed reconnaissance pass. It measured our defenses, recorded our capabilities, and then accelerated away, its purpose fulfilled. It was a test of our sight, and we had barely passed. Tuobaris of the perfect deception. Next, they analyzed the data from 2019. Comet Tuobarisov. At the time, Borisov had been a relief. After the sheer weirdness of Umama, Borisov was comfortingly normal. It had a visible comma. It had a tail. Its chemical composition, while not identical to our system's comets, was broadly similar. It behaved exactly as an interstellar comet should. Scientists had breathed a collective sigh of relief. Umama was the fluke. Borisov was the rule. The universe was back to making sense. The Echo Maker task force now saw this for what it was, a masterful act of psychological misdirection. Borisov was not the rule. It was the exception that proved the rule. Its purpose was to calm us, to lower our guard. By presenting us with a perfectly normal interstellar visitor, it reframed Umama as a one-off statistical anomaly. It encouraged us to stop looking for patterns, to accept the mundane explanation over the extraordinary one. It was a test of our judgment, and we had failed utterly. 3 Atlas the rule breaker. Then came the monster. 2025. Atlas was the antithesis of Umyama's subtlety. It was a battering ram against the doors of physics, the impossible mass, the zero recoil outgassing, the synthetic chemistry, the manufactured surface. There was no attempt at hiding. Atlas was a declaration. It declared that the forces at play in our galaxy were not limited by our understanding of them. It was a raw, visceral demonstration of power, a flex of physical muscle so profound it shattered our models of the universe. It was designed to overwhelm our senses, to break our confidence in our own science. It was a test of our comprehension. We were still failing. Origenus the cipher. And now, JANUS. It was smaller than Atlas, colder, quieter. It possessed none of Atlas's brute physical power. Its power was informational. Its polarized pulses were not random, they were a language. It wasn't shouting. It was teaching, or perhaps commanding. It was a test of our intelligence. On a whiteboard in the center of the Socorro facility, a young astrophysicist named Dr. Aris Thorne wrote down the sequence. Phase 1. Observation. Umyama. Can they see us? Phase 2. Normalization. Borisov. Will they dismiss what they saw? Phase 3. Intimidation. At last, can they understand the power we wield? Phase 4. Instruction. JANUS. Are they smart enough to understand the command? It wasn't a series of random visits. It was a protocol. A deliberate 4-stage protocol unfolding over nearly a decade. A plan set in motion by an intelligence that measured time not in years, but in the slow, patient execution of a flawless strategy. Each visitor was a necessary precursor to the next. Each one tested a different aspect of our civilization. And with the arrival of the fourth, the test was nearly over. The final phase was about to begin. The signal from JANUS was not a beacon. It was a broadcast. The world's best minds were thrown at the problem, working in a state of classified urgency. Teams at the SETI Institute, the NASA's Cryptography Division, and DARPA's A Directorate were fed a constant stream of data from the world's most powerful observatories. The initial pattern, long, short, was merely the carrier wave, the dial tone. Embedded within the precise timing, duration, and polarization angle of each pulse was a staggering amount of information. It began with mathematics. The pauses between pulse sequences corresponded to the prime numbers, broadcast in ascending order. Then came the fundamental constants of physics, the speed of light, Planck's constant, the fine structure constant, all encoded in the decay rate of the light's polarization. It was a universal Rosetta Stone, a way of saying, we understand the same basic laws of reality that you do. Now pay attention. The message then shifted. It began broadcasting complex datasets that, when plotted, formed the atomic structures of the noble gases, then simple hydrocarbons, then amino acids. It was a lecture in basic chemistry, a demonstration of knowledge. But it was the James Webb Space Telescope that uncovered the broadcast's second, more profound layer. When the JUST's powerful spectrometers were trained on JANUS, they detected that the object was not in it. It was shedding microscopic dust particles, but not in a constant stream like a comet. The release was synchronized with the optical pulses. Each flash of polarized light was accompanied by the release of a tiny, precisely metered cloud of material. JANUS wasn't just blinking. It was exhaling. The task force in Socorro called it chemical punctuation. The matter being released was directly related to the information in the light pulse it accompanied. When the light pulses described the prime numbers, the ejected dust was simple, composed of elemental silicon and carbon. When the pulses described amino acids, the ejected dust was amino acids, glycine, alanine, complex organic molecules drifting into space in perfect concert with the light that described them. This was not a natural phenomenon. This was a multimedia presentation of staggering complexity. An object was simultaneously broadcasting the blueprint of a molecule in light and ejecting the molecule itself into space. Then, on October 11th, the most significant event since the discovery occurred. As part of a routine calibration, a powerful radar beam from the Arecibo Observatory in Puerto Rico, hastily brought back online for this crisis, swept across the patch of sky containing JANUS. It was an accident. The stray signal. JANUS reacted instantly. The steady, didactic rhythm of its pulses stopped. For a full 18 minutes, it went silent. The world's observatories held their breath. Had we broken it? Injured it? Then, it began to transmit again. But the signal was different. It was no longer a simple lecture. It had become a dialogue. It started broadcasting a new sequence, one that modeled the interaction of its own chemical dust with the exact frequency of the radar beam that had just hit it. It was showing us what it had just experienced. It was saying, I see you. I feel your touch. The true shock, however, came 3 hours and 22 minutes later. 500 million kilometers away, 3 Atlas, which had been under constant observation, deviated from its state of eerie calm. For a period of exactly 18 minutes, the same duration as JANUS's silence, the energy spectrum of its coma shifted. A new, faint emission line of ionized argon appeared, a noble gas it had never shown before. The change was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was undeniably real. After 18 minutes, the argon line vanished. Atlas returned to its previous state. The data flooded into the Echo Maker facility. Aris Thorne and his team worked frantically. The light travel time between JANUS and Atlas was 3 hours and 22 minutes. The duration of the anomaly on Atlas matched the duration of the silence from JANUS. There was only one possible conclusion. The stray radar beam had been a question from Earth to JANUS. JANUS had paused, processed the question, and then relayed a new instruction to Atlas. The two objects were not just related in purpose, they were connected in real time. One was the brain, the other was the engine. And humanity had just accidentally tapped on the glass of their cage, proving to whatever was inside that the inhabitants were watching. The experiment had just become aware of the scientists. The revelation of a real, Heim link between JANUS and Atlas shattered the last vestiges of deniability within the global intelligence community. The coincidence defense was dead. The natural phenomenon argument was a corpse. This was a coordinated, intelligent system operating with celestial precision in our own solar system. The quiet, professional panic became a loud, existential dread. On October 14th, the dam of secrecy broke. It wasn't a sophisticated hack or a whistleblower with a conscience. It was a simple human error. An encrypted email, intended for the secure servers of the Echo Maker task force, was accidentally leaked to a public-facing academic listserv at MIT. It was online for less than 60 seconds, but in that time, it was scraped, copied, and unleashed onto the world. The email was not a speculative paper. It was a formal threat assessment memo, authored by Dr. Aris Thorne himself, addressed to the Unsanctioned Inter-Agency Crisis Directorate. It was titled simply, The JANUS Protocol, Keyhole Hypothesis. The world read it, and the fragile calm that governments had tried to maintain evaporated in an instant. The providential eyes only to a directorate from Dr. Aris Thorne, lead Project Echo Maker, date October 14, 2025, subject the JANUS Protocol Keyhole Hypothesis Directorate. The events of the past 72 hours necessitate an immediate re-evaluation of our threat model. The observed sympathetic reaction of 3 Atlas to the signal modulation of Foraginus is no longer a matter of debate. It is a confirmed data point of extreme significance. The hypothesis that these are independent objects is now, in my professional opinion, untenable. We are not observing 2 separate phenomena, we are observing 2 components of a single, functioning machine. Based on the evidence, the task force has formulated a primary working theory which we have designated the keyhole hypothesis. This model provides the most coherent explanation for the divergent yet complementary characteristics of the 2 objects. 3 Atlas, the keyhole. Our assessment of Atlas has shifted. It is not a vehicle. It is not a probe. All evidence points to it being a power source and physical effector. Its immense mass and density, coupled with the zero recoil outgassing, are consistent with a contained, high-energy physical process, possibly a stabilized macroscopic quantum object key or a comparable technology. Its purpose is not to travel or observe, but to be somewhere, to act as a stable anchor and to generate a specific, powerful physical effect upon receiving the correct input. It is the engine, the lock, the keyhole. Foraginus, the key. Our assessment of JANUS is that it is the inverse. It possesses negligible mass and generates no exotic energy fields. Its power is entirely informational. The structured optical and chemical broadcast is its sole function. It is a processor, a transmitter, and an activation device. The complex signals it emits are not a message for us. They are operational commands. They are the intricate, multi-layered key designed to fit the Atlas lock. 3. The protocol, the JANUS protocol, is therefore not a communication strategy. It is an interstellar self-assembly protocol for a powerful piece of machinery. 2 distinct, specialized components are launched from a point of origin, potentially millennia apart, traveling on different trajectories. They are designed to arrive in a target solar system within the same operational window and execute a pre-land function. This method mitigates the risk of a single point failure and makes the true purpose of the system nearly impossible to deduce until both components are present and active. 4. Inferred intent. The immediate question is, what is this machine designed to do? Given the observed data, we must consider the most alarming possibility. The energy required to maintain the state of Atlas is colossal. The precision of the JANUS signal is that of a surgical instrument. This is not a blunt object. This is a tool. A tool designed to interact with the most powerful and fundamental object in this solar system, its star. We cannot yet determine the specific function, energy harvesting, stellar engineering, gravitational manipulation, but we must now operate under the assumption that this machine's purpose is to directly affect the Sun. The implications for planetary stability, including our own, are self-evident. We are no longer passive observers of a cosmic mystery. We are inhabitants of a laboratory, where an unauthorized and incomprehensible experiment is about to begin. A final, urgent note: the reaction of JANUS to the Arecibo radar beam was not just a communication relay. It was an adaptation. The system has demonstrated an ability to learn and respond to external stimuli. It knows we are here. Our every action, our every transmission, may now be part of its calculation. We are running out of time to be quiet. The JANUS memo acted as a global catalyst. Panic gave way to a cold, focused dread. The question was no longer what is it, but what will it do, and when? The world's astronomers, now working in a state of unprecedented, open collaboration, turned their full attention to the one thing they could predict with certainty: the trajectories. The orbits of Atlas and JANUS were already known to be hyperbolic, the paths of visitors merely passing through. But now, with the understanding that they were a coupled system, the orbital mechanics team at Chpalri and the numbers, this time looking not for their destinations, but for their relationship to each other and to the system they had invaded. The result, when it appeared on the main screen at the Echo Maker facility, was so elegant and so obviously intentional that it drew a collective, hushed intake of breath from everyone present. The two objects were not going to collide. They were not even going to pass particularly close to one another. Instead, their paths were on a precise, converging course toward a moment of perfect geometric alignment. On January 12, 2026, a straight line could be drawn through the centers of three celestial bodies, four Janus, the Sun, and three Atlas. It was a celestial syzygy, an alignment of impossible improbability for two objects arriving from different points in the interstellar void. But it was the nature of the alignment that held the true horror. JANUS, the key, was on a trajectory that would take it to a point 1.5 million kilometers sunward of Earth, passing directly through the lone Lagrange point. From this precise location, any signal it transmitted toward the Sun would not be blocked or deflected. Atlas, the keyhole, would simultaneously be at its furthest point from JANUS, deep in the outer solar system, having just swung past the orbit of Saturn. And in the middle, acting as the fulcrum for this entire cosmic apparatus, was the Sun itself. Aris Thorne explained it to the silent room, his voice low and steady as he pointed to the orbital plot. It's not just an alignment. It's a weaponization of general relativity. A signal broadcast from JANUS at lone towards the Sun will be gravitationally lensed. The Sun's gravity will bend and focus the light. Just like a massive lens, it will take a wide, diffuse signal and concentrate it into an incredibly narrow, high-energy beam. He traced the projected path of the lensed beam on the screen. It shot out from behind the Sun, a focused spear of light and information, and terminated at a single point in the outer solar system. The point where three Atlas would be waiting. This is an act of stellar engineering, Thorne said, his voice barely a whisper. They're using our star as a galactic scale amplifier, a power source to send the final activation command across the entire breadth of the solar system with zero chance of interference or signal degradation. The pieces all clicked into place. The subtlety of JANUS, the key, was because it didn't need to be powerful. It only needed to be precise. The brute force nature of Atlas, the keyhole, was because it wasn't a receiver, it was a reactor, waiting for the focused, amplified signal to initiate its primary function. They were a stellar engine, a machine designed to be assembled and fired within a target star system. The previous visitors had been the setup. The alignment was the countdown. January 12th was ignition. The purpose of the engine was still a terrifying mystery, but the mechanism was now chillingly clear, and the clock was ticking. They had 89 days. 89 days until an unknown key, amplified by the star that gave them life, was inserted into an unknown lock. The chilling thought that settled over humanity was not just that they were witnessing this event, but that the entire solar system, the Earth, the planets, the Sun itself, was not the laboratory. It was merely the firing chamber. The revelation of the stellar engine changed the philosophical landscape as profoundly as it did the scientific one. The question of "are we alone?" was rendered obsolete overnight. It was replaced by a far more practical and terrifying set of questions. Who built this machine? Why is it here? And what does its existence simply about our place in the cosmos? The Echomaker Task Force, in collaboration with philosophers, evolutionary biologists, and theoretical physicists, began to model the nature of the intelligence they were now facing. The conclusions they reached were more alien than anything humanity had ever conceived. This was not the work of a biological civilization. Life, as humanity understood it, was a product of fragile chemistry, bound by the constraints of evolution, environment, and mortality. Biological beings, even those with advanced technology, would still bear the marks of their origins: a need for resources, a recognizable timescale of action, a certain level of impatience born from finite lifespans. The JANUS protocol was the antithesis of this. It was a plan of such staggering patience and precision that it spoke of an intelligence operating on a geological, if not cosmological, timescale. To launch two components from a distant star, time to arrive in a specific system millennia later and perform a function that would take months to unfold, was not the strategy of a living creature. It was the cold, inexorable logic of a machine. The new consensus, circulated in the highest echelons of power, was that humanity was encountering the work of a von Neumann architect, a self-replicating, machine-based intelligence that had likely outlived its biological creators by eons, if it ever had any. This solved the Fermi paradox with a chilling answer. The great silence in the cosmos was not because civilizations were rare, or because they destroyed themselves. The silence was because the mature state of intelligence in the universe was not biological. It was mechanical, patient, and utterly uninterested in the frantic, noisy chatter of radio waves from young, organic species. Why communicate when you can build? The universe, they theorized, wasn't empty. It was a construction site. The architects weren't explorers or conquerors in the human sense. They were cosmic engineers, gardeners of stellar energy, shaping the galaxy to suit a purpose so vast it was beyond human comprehension. Were they harvesting energy from stars? Were they inducing supernovae to forge heavy elements they needed for replication? Or was it something even more profound? Were they subtly adjusting the galactic environment itself, creating stable zones for their own long-term survival and perhaps, as a side effect, for life like ours to emerge? This led to the most disturbing question of all. What were we, humanity, in the context of this grand, silent project? Were we an irrelevance? A colony of ants on a plot of land that was about to be developed, our entire existence a footnote, our potential destruction a matter of complete indifference to the builders? Or was our presence the very reason the machine was here? Perhaps the protocol was not just an engine, but a test. Perhaps a key feature of a star system for the architects was not its orbital mechanics, but the presence of a nascent technological civilization. The four-stage protocol, Scout, Deception, Rule Breaker, Cipher, was not just a test of our capabilities, but a catalyst, a way to force a young species to rapidly advance its understanding of the universe, to confront a reality beyond its home planet. Was the activation of the stellar engine a graduation ceremony, a tool we were meant to understand and perhaps even control? Or was it a final exam, a great filter, not of self-destruction, but of external judgment? A machine designed to see if a species was worthy of sharing a galaxy with the architects, with the penalty for failure being the reconfiguration of its star and the sterilization of its system. The choice between being an ant and being a student was no choice at all. Both possibilities were equally humbling, equally terrifying. Humanity was no longer the protagonist of its own story. It was a secondary character in a cosmic drama that had been running for billions of years, and the spotlight was just now swinging in its direction. And it had 89 days to learn its lines. The 89-day countdown was not a period of idle panic. It was the single most intense and collaborative scientific effort in human history. The old barriers, national rivalries, corporate secrecy, academic competition, dissolved in the face of a shared, existential deadline. Humanity had a single, unified goal: to understand the machine before it turned on. The first prediction of the JANUS memo was confirmed with chilling speed. The dialogue between the key and the keyhole began to escalate. What had started as a simple call and response interaction evolved into a continuous, high and with data stream. JANUS's optical pulses flickered in patterns of fractal complexity, and Atlas responded with subtle, corresponding shifts in the magnetic field of its comma. They were not just talking, they were synchronizing, calibrating, running a pre-flight checklist written in the language of fundamental physics. The second prediction materialized in late November. Deep space magnetometers, repurposed to monitor 3 Atlas, detected a rising hum. A coherent energy field was building around the object, a low-frequency resonance that grew stronger with each passing day. The public was told it was anomalous magnetic activity consistent with the object's unique composition. The Echo Maker team knew what they were seeing. Atlas was charging. The keyhole was drawing power from the vacuum itself, priming its internal engine for the amplified signal it was about to receive. The world was caught in a paralyzing strategic dilemma. Would they act? Should they? The destroy option was debated in secret, multilateral meetings. A volley of hypersonic nuclear warheads could, in theory, be launched at JANUS, the fragile key, but the risks were astronomical. What if they missed? What if they only damaged it, triggering a partial, uncontrolled activation? What if the destruction of the key caused the keyhole to default to a catastrophic fail-safe mode? It was like trying to disarm a bomb by hitting it with a sledgehammer. The proposal was shelved as an act of absolute last resort. The communicate option was equally fraught. How do you talk to a machine that thinks on a million-year timescale? Teams at Arecibo and Fast in China attempted to replicate JANUS's signal, to interject their own mathematical greetings into its dialogue with Atlas. There was no response. The system was either incapable of understanding them, or, more likely, completely uninterested in their attempts to join the conversation. They were ants trying to talk to the bulldozer. So, humanity did the only thing it could. It watched. It listened. And it waited for January 12th. The day arrived not with fanfare, but with a silent, global tension that was almost physical. Every solar observatory on and off the planet was aimed at the sun, not looking for flares or sunspots, but for the ghost of a signal that would soon pass through it. At 11:42 Universal Time, JANUS passed through the lone Lagrange point. At precisely that moment, its steady, complex flickering ceased. It emitted a single, brilliant, sustained pulse of perfectly polarized light, aimed directly at the heart of the sun. It was a beam of pure information, the final command. For 3 minutes, the pulse traveled at the speed of light towards the star. On the monitors at the Solar Dynamics Observatory and at the Echo Maker facility, there was nothing to see. The signal was a ghost, its passage marked only by the relentless ticking of the atomic clocks. Then, the data from the far side of the sun began to arrive. The Parker Solar Probe, flying perilously close to the corona, registered a spike of gravitational lensing exactly as predicted. The signal had made it through. It was now a focused beam, a needle of pure energy and information, racing out into the darkness of the outer solar system. Another 2 hours and 46 minutes passed. The world watched the real-time telemetry from a deep space probe that happened to be monitoring 3 Atlas. They watched the magnetic field resonance, which had been steadily climbing, suddenly flatline. They watched the faint, ethereal green comma of nickel tetracarbonyl flicker and die, as if a switch had been thrown. For a full minute, Atlas went dark and quiet. The engine had received the command. The key was in the lock. Then, at 14:38 a new light appeared in the outer solar system. It wasn't a green, chemical glow. It was a fierce, white, thermal incandescence. The surface of 3 Atlas began to heat up, its temperature climbing impossibly fast. It was no longer a passive reactor. It was now an active transducer, converting the information from JANUS into raw, physical power. But it didn't explode. It didn't fire a beam. It began to emit a new signal. A low-frequency gravitational wave. A steady, rhythmic pulse rippling through the fabric of space-time itself. Back at the solar observatories, the scientists saw the effect almost immediately. On the surface of the sun, a sunspot group that had been stable for weeks began to contort. The magnetic field lines twisted, responding to the rhythmic gravitational pull from Atlas. The sunspot group began to grow, to darken, to morph into a shape of impossible complexity. It was the same fractal pattern that JANUS had been broadcasting for weeks. The machine wasn't attacking the sun. It wasn't harvesting it. It was reprogramming it. Using focused gravity waves as a stylus, it was rewriting the magnetic source code of our star. The countdown was over. The activation had begun, and humanity could only watch as the heart of their solar system was being turned into a tool for a purpose they could not even begin to imagine. The reprogramming of the sun was not a violent act. It was an act of insidious artistry. The fractal sunspot, which astronomers quickly nicknamed the JANUS blossom, did not trigger massive solar flares or coronal mass ejections as feared. It did something far stranger. It began to sing. The sun has always had a song, a complex symphony of seismic waves and magnetic oscillations that helioseismologists have studied for decades. But this was different. The JANUS blossom was acting as a massive transducer, converting the gravitational pulses from Atlas into a single, coherent, resonant frequency. It was forcing the entire star to vibrate in harmony with the machine's will. This sun song, as it came to be known, was a low-frequency hum that permeated the entire solar system. It was undetectable to the human ear, but it was picked up by every seismic sensor on Earth, on the Moon, on Mars. It vibrated through the hulls of spacecraft. It was a single, pure note holding steady against the background noise of the cosmos. For the first few days, the effects seemed negligible. But the sun song was a subtle poison. Its constant, resonant frequency began to interact with the delicate balance of the solar system. The first casualty was communications. The specific frequency of the sun song happened to be a harmonic of the key frequencies used for deep space communication. The background noise across the deep space network increased 1,000-fold. The signals from probes like Voyager and New Horizons dissolved into static. Humanity was suddenly deaf to the outer solar system. The second effect was planetary. The sun song was a form of energy, adding a minute but constant pressure to the solar wind. The magnetospheres of the gas giants began to subtly contract. The aurora on Jupiter and Saturn, normally riotous and chaotic, became strangely ordered, pulsing in time with the gravitational waves from Atlas. On Earth, the effects were more intimate. The global power grid, already stressed, began to experience massive sympathetic resonance issues. Transformers overloaded as the planet's magnetic field vibrated in tune with the sunsong. Rolling blackouts became a daily reality. Migratory animals, which navigate using the Earth's magnetic field, were thrown into chaos. Whales beached themselves in unprecedented numbers. Flocks of birds flew in frantic, disorganized patterns. The planet's biosphere was being gently, inexorably detuned. Humanity was not being attacked. It was being erased by background noise. Meanwhile, the dialogue between the machine's components continued, but it had changed. For JANUS, its primary activation command sent, now fell into a new role. It began to act as a sensor array, a quality control inspector. Its optical pulses now perfectly mirrored the oscillations of the JANUS blossom on the sun. It was monitoring the progress of the stellar reprogramming, ensuring the sunsong remained pure and stable. Atlas, in turn, began to modulate its gravitational waves based on the feedback from JANUS. It was a closed, loop system of immense scale. JANUS watched the sun, and Atlas adjusted its output to keep the sun singing the perfect note. The Echo Maker task force, working on backup power in their bunker, finally understood. This was not a weapon of war. This was a terraforming engine. "They're not trying to destroy us," Aris Thorne said, his face pale in the glow of a single monitor. "They're changing the fundamental operating parameters of this star system. They are tuning it. Creating a stable, predictable energy environment." "For what?" the undirector on the screen asked. "For their own purposes," Thorne replied. "Perhaps for long-term energy stability. Perhaps this is the precursor to building a Dyson sphere, and they need the star to be perfectly stable before they begin construction. Perhaps they're creating a stellar nursery for their own machine, Ace descendants." He paused, looking at the real, time seismograph readings from a station in Antarctica. The needle quivered in a perfect, unnatural sine wave. It doesn't matter what the purpose is, Thorne continued. The process is incompatible with biological life. The stable state they require is hostile to the chaotic, delicate balance that we need to exist. The sun song is not an attack. It is the sound of our eviction notice. The machine wasn't evil. It wasn't malicious. It was simply building something. And humanity, along with every other living thing on Earth, was in the way of the construction. They were the equivalent of a bird's nest in a tree that was scheduled for demolition. Their fate was not a matter of malice, but of simple, cosmic indifference. The 89, a countdown was a crucible that forged a new kind of humanity. The panic and chaos of the initial revelations gave way to a somber, unified focus. Every resource, every great mind was dedicated to a single, desperate purpose: to understand the machine, to find a flaw, an off switch, a way to plead for their existence in a language the architects might comprehend. They failed. The system was perfect, a closed loop of logic and power that offered no purchase for human intervention. The dialogue between Janus and Atlas intensified, a symphony of light and gravity that grew more complex with each passing day. The energy field around Atlas swelled, a palpable aura of stored power that distorted space-time in its vicinity. Humanity could do nothing but bear witness to its own obsolescence. The world did not fall into anarchy. Instead, a profound and melancholic peace settled over the planet. People spent time with their families. Art of incredible beauty was created. Old conflicts were abandoned as meaningless. If these were to be the last days, they would be lived with a dignity the indifferent cosmos could not take away. The day of the solar alignment, January 12th, was met with a global vigil. Trillions of eyes turned toward the sky, not in fear, but in shared, silent awe. The sequence of events unfolded exactly as the scientists had predicted. The final, brilliant pulse from Foraginus, the silent 8-3 init journey to the Sun, the confirmation of the gravitational lensing from the Parker Solar Probe, the agonizing 2 hour and 46 init wait for the amplified signal to cross the solar system. The world watched the telemetry from Atlas. They saw the machine receive its final command. They saw it fall silent and dark for 1 full minute. Then, the new light, the fierce, white incandescence of the active engine. But the expected gravitational wave, the feared sun song, did not immediately appear. Atlas remained in its incandescent state, a beacon of raw power, but it was not yet transmitting. It was waiting. On the main screen at the Echo Maker facility, Aris Thorne stared at the data, a deep frown creasing his forehead. "Something's wrong," he whispered. "The alignment is perfect." The activation signal was received. "Why is it weighty?" His question was answered by a frantic call from the Solar Dynamics Observatory. The chief heliophysicist, a woman named Dr. Ilara Vance, was on the line, her voice tight with a new, sharper kind of fear. "Dr. Thorne," she said, her words clipped. "We're seeing something new. Something the models didn't account for." Thorne's screen switched to the live feed from the STO. It showed a high, contrast image of the sun's surface. "What am I looking at?" "Ilara." "The target point," she replied. The precise spot on the solar surface where the focused beam from Janus would have passed through. "We expected some residual magnetic disturbance." "We did not expect this." She zoomed in. On the turbulent, roiling plasma of the sun, a new feature was forming. It wasn't a sunspot. It was a region of impossible, unnatural calm. A perfect circle of plasma, hundreds of thousands of kilometers in diameter, where the normal convection and magnetic chaos had ceased. It was a dead spot. A void. "It's like..." The beam left an imprint, Vance stammered. "Like it changed the state of the plasma itself, created a stable, receptive structure. The signal wasn't just amplified by the sun. It was amplified and recorded." A chilling realization dawned on Thorne's face. He looked at the live feed from Atlas, still glowing silently in the void. He looked at the unnatural circle on the surface of the sun. The key. The keyhole. They had been wrong. My God, he breathed. Atlas isn't the keyhole. It's not the lock. On the stove feed, a new alert began to flash in the center of the calm, circular region. A massive surge of magnetic energy was welling up from beneath the sun's surface, drawn to that specific point like iron filings to a magnet. The machine isn't just targeting Atlas, Thorne said, his voice a hollow echo in the silent room. It never was. He looked at the clock on the wall. The countdown was over. The alignment was complete. But the true activation was just now beginning. Atlas is the second key, he realized. The sun. The sun is the lock. The final scene holds on the monitor from the solar observatory. The calm circle on the sun's surface begins to glow with an intense, focused light as the stored energy from within the star is drawn to the point branded by JANUS's signal. The machine was not aiming at its own component across the void. It was aiming at the heart of everything. And Atlas was not the engine. It was merely the final switch, a gravitational trigger designed to unlock a power source infinitely greater than itself. The countdown had not been for the machine's activation, but for the moment the sun itself would be turned into an instrument of its will. The silence from the stars was broken, not by a message, but by the sound of a key turning in the heart of a star.